Hi, everybody joining us. Welcome to our second session today about administering MDTP tests remotely. We're letting all the participants join, so we'll get started right at 3:30. When you come in, if you have scratch paper and a pencil so you can record questions, we will have a Q&A presentation at the end.
And we'll also get to do a little math during the session.
You always need paper, pencil for math.
There you go. Have that ready.
Okay, it's 3:30, so we'll get started. If anybody pops on in, just join us where we are. Welcome to our second session of administering MDTP tests remotely to support your use of using MDTP assessments during COVID-19 and beyond. Actually, right? My name is Kimberly Samaniego, and I am the statewide director for MDTP. MDTP is a joint funded project funded through the CSU and the UC systems. We are grant funded to provide everything that we talk about to all California educators, math educators, for free. I'm going to introduce our panelists today. Today's presentation is going to be presented by Pat King, and Pat is from the UC Davis MDTP office. They support the region in Northern California, and she's here with Julie Mustard, and Julie's here also. She's also in the UC Davis office. I'm also here with Terry Gibb. Terry Gibbs is here from UCLA. She's the outreach support facilitator for that region. And I'm here with Carol Treglio. And Carol is here with me from the UC San Diego office. Carol supports the educators in the San Diego and Southern California from like Riverside down to the border. And then also here is Karen. Karen is works in MDTP director's office with me to support everybody in the state. And so be sure, like Pat said, to have your paper pencil. We'll have a question answer. You can type questions in the chat if you have any questions while it's coming up. And then the rest of us will moderate and answer questions. So Pat, take it away.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. As Kim mentioned earlier, this is the second of a 5-part series that we are developing to help support teachers during this time in particular. The first session that we did earlier this afternoon was an introduction to MDTP, an introduction to the reporting, when to use it, why to use it, what you could use. That session was recorded, and it will be posted at the website a little bit later this week. This session is about monitoring, about administering the tests remotely. And we will be presenting in this session, particularly the logistics. So this is a very detailed session. However, the goal is that by the end of the day, you'll know where all the tutorials are so that you can feel confident using our system independently. This session is also being recorded and will be posted at the end of the week so that you can refer to it or share it with other folks in your department. We would like you to have scratch paper and pencil available. As questions come up, please record them on your scratch paper, and if I don't address your answer during the session, then go ahead and put that in the Q&A tab, and then our moderators will bring those questions back to us at the end for the whole group to work with. This is our agenda for today. We're going to make some suggestions of things that you can do to administer the tests remotely to your students. We're going to take some time for you to look at the screens that your students will see so that you'll know what their experience is like so that you can prepare them for remote testing. Then I'll go into details about how you need to set up your classes so that you can proctor and administer the exam. Then we will have a question and answer time at the end so that we can help you be ready to use our testing system. Please note that webinar number 3 is in the works. We have planned webinar number 3, which is what your results mean. Carol is going to present that session either September 23rd or 24th, depending on whether you're middle school or high school. Our hope is that you'll be able to administer this test during the later part of August, beginning of September. So when you have your results, this 3rd webinar will help you work more effectively with your data. So I have always used the MDTP testing. Oh, I forgot to tell you a little bit about myself. I've taught math in Davis for 33 years. And during 10 of those years, I've worked with MDTP both as an item writer and to help put tests together. And over the years of teaching in Davis, I have used MDTP as a formative assessment to help me present more effective lessons, to be able to differentiate my curriculum as needed so that my students could be more successful. I think it's important that when you administer the test to the students, you let them know how you're planning to use that data. The tests were written with the belief that if you know what prerequisite skills your students are bringing to the course, you'll be able to better plan how to meet your students' needs. So the tests are written as a prerequisite for the current course that you are teaching. So recognize that as these tests are written, the teachers meet during the summer to think about the topics that are important that students bring to your course. We write the answers so that they can be used to identify strengths that your students are bringing to the course, as well as being able to look at misconceptions or any unfinished learning that they might have. It's important for you to convey to your students that this is not a course final. For example, a student in 8th grade, you are not being tested on everything you would have learned in 7th grade. It's really looking at what skills students are bringing to your course. And the reason why it's important that your students understand that is that it's important that they just not click on answers to get through the test. We want them to know that if they do not know the answer to a question yet, and the key word is there, yet, that they should just leave it blank and understand that you will be using this data to inform your instruction. As we look at the readiness tests, recognize that this will help you understand where your students are in a progression of topics in mathematics. We know that topics like decimals and fractions continue up through the calculus courses. So the information that you will be getting for your students, from your students, is just a snapshot of where they are in that progression. We want your students to know that this is a foundation that you're going to build on, so that this is not a judgment of what happened last spring, but recognize that you will use this to bring their learning forward from wherever they are today. Now more than ever, it would be helpful if you could encourage a growth mindset in your students so that they recognize that you were there as a support, and your lessons will be reflected in what information you get from these tests. Now, I no longer have a school email. So what we're going to do today is you're going to look at the student experience from my screen, not from your screen as a student, because without a teacher email, I can't create student accounts. So as you look at this screen as a student, I want you to use your note paper to make any notes of what you would want to tell your students and how you're going to prepare your students for taking this test remotely. It's one thing to administer the test when you can see your students in person, but if you're administering the test remotely, there may be things that you want to emphasize, and I'll share some of those things that we've learned from last spring. We are going to do a couple problems as a group. Again, this will be different in the way that your students will experience it, but I want you to be able to see as a teacher what the student screens look like so that when the students are testing and you're proctoring, you'll be able to answer any questions that they might have. So for today, you're going to solve the problem that you'll see on the screen. You're going to record your answer choice in the chat, and Carol is going to monitor the chat. When we have 5 correct answers, we'll move on to the next item. Now, I have not administered the test remotely to my students, but as I prepared for this, I thought about my lesson plan. What would I do in order to have my students be ready to take this test and to take it with confidence? So the day before testing, I would tell my students that the test that they're going to be taking tomorrow is a 45 question multiple choice test. They are going to take the test during a Zoom meeting. If I had 2 hours, I would administer the test during the 2-hour Zoom. If I am going to have my students as only for 1 hour, which is what I found out our district is doing now, then I'm going to tell the students that they will start the test today and know that they will have additional time to finish the test tomorrow if they need that. Now, as a side note, just to let you know as a teacher, the number of questions varies a little bit depending on the age level. 6th graders have only 35 items, 7th grade have 40 items, the high school classes generally have 45 items. When our tests are written, we write the test with the expectation, the hope that students would be able to complete the test within 1 classroom period. So they're written with the expectation that students would have about 45 minutes to work on the test itself. We know, however, that anything that you do with technology, you have to plan for those things that take a little bit longer. So one of the things that I will show you later in today's session is how you can extend more test time to your students as needed. I want my students to understand that they should not be guessing during the test, that if there's any question that they can't answer just yet, recognize that's something that we'll work on in the class this year. Tomorrow, when my students, or when you, if I'm talking to you as my students, tomorrow when you enter the Zoom meeting, I will share the URL and a 5-character code in the chat tomorrow, and that will allow you to work on the test. And again, keep in mind that if you need additional time, I will give you directions on how to deal with that the next day. Now, on the screen now, you see an animation. This animation is in your teacher account so that you can share it with your students. This animation was developed just to help students with the remote testing. And I would want to show, this is a YouTube, by the way, it has no sound to it, but I would show this to my students so that we could talk about my expectations for their testing process. So there is no sound. You might want to take your notes about what you see in the animation, because you can share this with your students about how they can prepare their workspace, test taking behaviors and things to do while they are taking the test, and copyright law. I'm going to ask my students to look at the 5 conditions here of what they're going to do while they're preparing their workspace. Then I'm going to reinforce what my expectations are. For me to help you in this course, it's important that you do your own work. You need to find a quiet area so that you can do your best work to let me know what it is that you remember to do from the past. It's helpful if you have a stable internet connection, which means that if you could ask members of your household not to stream videos or movies while you're taking the test, that would be helpful. You're going to need blank paper to use as scratch paper. You want to have a clear workspace so that you have nothing getting in the way. And please note that there are no calculators allowed on the test. This test is written with numbers that are not messy. We want you to demonstrate what math concepts you have, so you do not need a calculator for this test, and you should not use a calculator. Now, if you have an IEP, and again, this is more of a teacher note, if your students have an IEP that designates that they should be using a calculator, that is something that you want to convey to those individual students. During the test, I'm going to ask you to please work each problem on scratch paper. For best results, you want to not guess, do not click on anything randomly, skip any problems that you're spending too much time on. You can come back to it if there is time. The program will remember where you are and what questions you have answered and what you've skipped. So recognize that, do as much as you can today, and when you come back tomorrow, it will remember all of your answers and where you left off. Please, again, in order for me to help you as a teacher, it's important that you do not use any outside resources or get help from other people so that I can prepare the best lessons that will help you. The tests, I will set the Zoom window for when you can actually take the tests. When you're finished, you can just save and exit. And again, if you come back the next day, you will have a different code to use when you come back. And that is something that we'll talk about a little bit later. These are copyrighted materials. So please note that you need to be honest and trustworthy as you take the test. All right, so at this point, I would ask my students, clearly, if they have any particular questions about the test. And then I also want to show them the instruction screen before they actually enter the test. This is the same screen that they will see when they enter the test tomorrow, but I want to reinforce what the instructions are, and it's highly likely they won't read them when they're taking the test itself. So I want to emphasize again the expectations that I have. Again, just a reminder, calculators are not recommended and you should not use a calculator. I want you to use scratch paper and select the best response from any given choices. Because you're testing at home, you're going to destroy your scratch paper when you are finished. If you cannot answer a question, just leave it blank. Don't guess on any of the items. And if you find you're spending too much time on a question, recognize that you can skip it and you can return to those questions anytime during the test. The test portal looks like this. Both the students and the teachers, there's only one website, one link that you need to know, and that's this link here. So as you enter the test as a student or as a teacher, you're going to have the same portal, the same screen. So when students enter the test, they're just going to click on, oops, excuse me. Let me go ahead and get to the website. And I need to share my screen a little differently here. All right, so as we're at the website, we're going to now enter the test as a student. So you will have greeted your students in your Zoom meeting. You're going to share this URL for students to get to the testing website. They're going to click on students. You will have shared the code with them, and I'll show you later in this session how you get that code. Once they enter the test code, they'll submit, and then they'll be asked to enter their name. And so for the purposes of today, this is going to be student C, and their ID is 18. Now, one important note for this particular screen, it's very important that your students understand what last name and what ID number you have in your class roster. Sometimes students have variations on last names. Sometimes they may have a last name that was useful for them in September and it might change in August. So it's important that prior to the testing, students know what last name and student ID you are using if it's different from what you have in your class roster. So you'll need to communicate individually to students to confirm that they know what's in your class roster. If the last name and the ID do not match, then students won't be allowed into the test. There's the instructions. And again, students can read that at their leisure. And then we're going to begin the test. So this is question number 1. I'd like you to do the math. Choose the correct answer. Please put your answer in the chat, and Carol will let me know when there are 5 correct answers.
Okay.
Thank you. Question number 2. Put your answer in the chat.
Okay.
All right, so notice up at the top of the screen, there's 2 green circles, so that indicated that students have answered those particular questions. Another feature I'd like to show you is that if a student takes their cursor and hovers over a graphic, if they say that the graphic is too small to read, notice that they can hover their cursor right over the graphic. It will enlarge it so that they're able to read it more easily. They can skip a question when they wish. And again, notice up here, notice it shows that the first 2 questions were answered, and this is a question that we have skipped. When students are finished, if the time is up, they can simply save and exit. And again, the program will remember where they were as they left the program. So if they need to come back the second day, it will pick them up right where they left off and will remember where they were. Now, clearly, live proctoring would be the best way to administer this test. At MDTP, we spend a lot of time being sure that our tests are statistically reliable and valid, that they have predictive value, but that was based on administering the test with a teacher who was proctoring and could meet all of these conditions. So since we're not able to proctor live, please note that when they're taken remotely, that results may be compromised, which I'm sure is no surprise to you, but we have 2 recommendations. First of all, this test results should only be used as one of multiple measures if you are using this data to help inform the next course enrollment for students. It's important for you to recognize that without being able to proctor the test, that the reliability and predictiveness of it may be compromised. Secondly, we strongly advise that the student's regular teacher proctor the exam in a virtual session or Zoom so that you can control the testing conditions. You'll be able to start the exam and to close the exam at a particular time. You'll be able to monitor students' access during the test time and answer any questions during the testing. So keep in mind that one of the beliefs is that this test is going to provide information for you as a teacher that you're going to use diagnostically as you prepare your lessons. For students to be able to be comfortable and confident that this information is not being used to judge them, it would really be helpful if you've developed a relationship with your students before they take the test and they recognize that how that test data, again, is going to be used. To support you in using the testing remotely, there were 4 documents that were shared with you with your Zoom link. The first document that's important for you to read is the Remote Testing Policy and Use Agreement. If you administer the test, you need to read this particular document to know what conditions you are agreeing to. So this is a brief document, but it is letting you know what our policies are and what we assume you are using as you administer the test. A second document that we shared were notes for teachers on remote testing. These were ideas that were shared by teachers this spring who did the remote testing. I've shared a lot of these ideas already in this PowerPoint, but recognize you may have some other ideas that you can pick from their experience. A third document is the 6 guidelines to inform next course enrollment, which we'll talk a bit about using the testing data with your school. And the fourth document that you will probably find helpful is recommendations for testing and suggested uses. This is a document that's quite extensive that talks about when you might consider testing and what tests you might administer starting from grade 5 through calculus. We talked about this a little bit in session number 1, but this document again is shared with you, and if you have any questions, again, feel free to contact us so we can help with that. All right, so that takes a little bit of the student experience. What I'd like to do now is talk about the details of the logistics of testing. I'm going to go through the complete steps that you need in order to assign your class a test and to proctor it, but I'd like you to know that with all these details that we have extensive tutorials available at the UC San Diego website. The link is here, and you can always come back to these tutorials at any time as needed. What I'd like to do on this slide is give you an overview of all the steps that are involved in the testing, and then again, we'll break it down and look at individual steps as we move along. Once your account is created, what the first things you're going to need to do is to add your class and upload your class roster. Now, you only need to do this once at the beginning of the school year. The class roster will stay with you throughout the entire school year, and I will show you the steps that you need to take to upload that roster. It's very easy to add a student or delete a student once your roster is loaded, and I will show you those steps. Prior to test day, you will also need to assign a test to the class that you set up. Now, when you assign a test, keep in mind that this is a test for prerequisite skills for the course that the student is enrolled in. So if you are teaching a standards-based course, if it's an 8th grade course, the Common Core class that you are teaching, you would administer the 8th grade readiness test or preparedness test. If you're teaching an Algebra 1 or an Integrated 1 test, you would administer the test for the Algebra 1, Integrated 1 readiness test. You have access as a teacher to all of the tests that are in our test bank. So the tests that you should use, and again, the document that I showed you on the last slide will give you those specific recommendations, but the test that you should use will be the test that provides the best information for the prerequisite skills that students are bringing to your course. These are not course finals. So recognize that, again, the goal is to use these as a formative assessment to help you in your lesson planning as students enter your course. What I will show you a little bit later is how you can preview all of those tests and be sure that the test is appropriate for your students. If you are teaching a course that is out of grade level, or if you're teaching a support class or a resource class, note that you have access to other tests that are below your grade level, so that if that information would be helpful in you helping your students, designing instruction for your students, you do have access to all of the tests that are in our test bank. On the test day, what you are going to do is simply click on the class there will be a button that I'll show you in a few minutes that says Proctor the Exam. When you click on Proctor the Exam, it's going to generate a test code. Remember that when we looked at the student screen, you just clicked on student and then you typed in I typed in the 5-character code. So you will do the same thing on the test day. You will get the URL when you proctor the exam, and you will record the code and share it with your students in a Zoom chat. Now, for security purposes, all the codes that are generated during a day are cleared at 5:30 that night. We don't want students going out and doing research beyond when a test can be proctored. So if you are administering the test during a Zoom meeting, I would recommend that you close the test after your Zoom meeting has ended. You don't want students to have open access to the test other than when you can proctor it remotely. When you need to return to the test, when students need to return to the test, you would just simply click on the proctor button again, and it will generate a new code for the next day. Now to do that, you need to do that after 5:30 at night, because at 5:30 is when all the codes are removed. So you would, again, the next day, then simply share the URL again and give them the new code so they can finish the testing. The test results are available to you immediately. We don't have time to look at the results in this session, but if you go back to webinar number 1, there's time there where I went through all the report tabs, and the session that Carol will be doing, webinar number 3 in September, will give you more details on working with those reports. So now let's go in and take a look at, and again, let me change my screening here. Let's take a look at what you will need to do as a teacher. Again, you recognize this screen, same portal, same URL that the students use. The difference is now you're going to click in as an educator. You're going to click on readiness because you're looking at the readiness test. Your account is associated with your email. You'll have a password. Now, if you used our online system last year, your password from last year has been removed. On August 1st, we do a system-wide clearing of all the passwords for security purposes. So if you used our online system last year, you'll be directed to just create a new password, and there will be screens that will direct you through that. You will not see this screen, but your screen. Now, again, I don't have a school account, so I'm going to be Edna for the purposes of today's workshop. So I'm Edna Crabapple, and this is what your screen will most likely look like when you first enter the test portal as a teacher, because you'll be entering as a school faculty member. Over here on the right-hand side is an action button. And with that action button, it will allow you to view your account, to edit your account, or delete an account if needed. The button that I want to show you that I think will be most helpful for you is here in the center of the screen. This is a resources button, and when you click on the resources button, notice that you have tutorials and test descriptions. When you click on test descriptions, it takes you to a screen where all of the tests are listed. Using this screen and this button, you can preview any of the tests. Notice that they're available in English and in Spanish. You can preview any of the tests ahead of time to know what the test looks like, how the test flows. Our tests are written with the easiest items first, and it becomes increasingly difficult as the test continues. It is not a branched logic test. Every student is taking the same set of 45 questions in the same order, because we believe, again, in looking at the validity and reliability of our tests, we know that that makes a difference. So again, you can preview any of the tests that we have in our test bank. So as we go and look at Edna's account, we can view the account. This is the account that I use for the workshops that I lead. So what we're going to do now is take a look at what you will need to do as you create your classes and work with your rosters. The system is pretty intuitive. Notice that there's a blue button right here that suggests that it's time to add a new class. In order to help you with all of these steps, this button again, the resource button in the center, has tutorials that will lead you through all of the steps that you need to set up your classes. There are tutorials available for different users. There's district level use, there's school level use. We're interested in the teacher's level of use today, so we're going to look at tutorials on setting up classes. In this listing, it's in the order that you would normally use throughout a school year to work with your students. This is where you can get the link to share and look at the instruction video that we looked at earlier today as a YouTube. You can share the link and work with your students there to guide them through your expectations for the test. Now we want to add a class. So as we add a class, this is the tutorial that will simply tell you what to do. The steps are pretty straightforward. You're going to type in your school name. You will be associated with a school, so these would be pull-down menus. If you want to have another teacher, like a special ed teacher or a resource teacher, also have access to your student scores, you can add a second instructor here as long as they have an account created in our system. If they don't have an account created in our system, someone in your school administration, either at the district level or at the school level, can add the names. Teachers cannot. You want to give your class a name that's significant, and you'll remember, you'll select the term and the period. So now we've created a class, and again, it's very intuitive. The next thing you need to do is to upload your class roster. So I'm going to close that tutorial. And here are the directions on how to upload a class roster. Now, as you look at this particular screen, notice this is very dense. And if you're a list follower and you just like text, you can go through the steps just by following this list here. However, if you are more visual and you would find screenshots easier to use, notice that we have PDFs that include the actual screenshots of all the steps. So we've just added the class. We know that we could view the class just by using that action button. We have a class name in. So the next step, and again, it's highlighted here, the next thing you need to do is you need to download the MDTP template so that you can enter your student names. The blank template looks like this. Please note that you have to use this template, and this is critical that you not mess around with this template. It needs to be used just the way that it is. Do not put anything in the first row, and keep the sheets just the way that they are. In order to enter your student names, you can do it manually if you want to, but it's faster if you download your class roster from whatever school attendance system that you have. If you download it as an Excel file, you just need the student's last name, first name, and their student ID. Once you have an Excel file with your student names, you'll simply copy those names and paste them into this MDTP template. Again, when you paste it, do not copy over the first row and don't mess around with the sheets. Once you have those names into the template, again, very intuitive, you're simply going to then upload it to the MDTP website so that your student roster then is there for students to enter the system. Before you leave, you can preview that the roster is entered correctly. If you need to delete a name because class attendance changes, so anytime you look into your class, you can preview your class roster. If someone needs to be removed, you just click on the arrow here to remove the student. If somebody new it comes into your class, there's a blue button that just says add a new enrollment. When you click on that button, it will just add one more blank row here, and you'll need to type in their first name, their last name, and their student ID, and then they will be in part of your system. All right, once you have your roster loaded, you then are ready to assign, proctor, or close an exam. So again, here are the steps for all three of those. We're going to take a look at the practice test that we did today so that you can see what those buttons are. So notice here that for the test that you participated in today, here's the code that we used with the student name. The code is still active till 5:30 tonight. If my Zoom meeting is over and I don't want students to work on the test without me proctoring, what you can do is just go to the action button, and notice in the action button, it tells you that you can close the exam. So once you click on close the exam, notice now that the code is no longer active. So that testing session is closed. What we're going to do now is I'm going to show you now, again, looking at this list here, we're going to add a new assignment. This is just our practice test. You have a choice of adding any of the tests that we have in our system. You'll just simply click on it. It has the start date, and then you can save it for your students. So if I decided to administer this test, notice there is no code. When I'm ready to administer the test, I can simply go into, again, the action button here tells me that I can proctor the exam. When I proctor the exam, it's going to ask me when you want to start the testing. It's going to give you the URL. It's going to give you the code that you are going to share with your students. And now this test is active for students to use. What I'd like to show you next is some of the other options that you have with this action button. This is the test that we did today as a sample. Notice since there is some student data here in this file, this is where you can click to see the report of your students' scores. Again, we can proctor an exam, you can preview an exam here. So again, these are all the action buttons that you have available to you as a teacher. All right, I think that takes us through all of the setup. Let me return to a PowerPoint here. Again, we're not going to go through the reporting tabs because our time is limited, but this is a summary of what the screen looks like when you're in the reporting part of the system. It's the same URL that you set up your class in, the same URL that the students use. Again, if you go back and listen to webinar number 1, you'll see what tabs are available to you. And then again in September, Carol will talk about using the data from those reports. Now, I know this was a lot of information, a lot of steps to go through, but what I'd like to do is show you that you have another resource available to you. And that resource is the UC San Diego website. So let me just switch here real quickly. At the UCD website, on our MDTP website, notice that you can click here to see, to find the contacts for your region, so that if you want to contact someone personally within your region, you can do so here. We have a tab that also lists all the assessments that we have available for students. We also have written response items that are available for students. There will be a webinar in October that will go over the use of these particular items, and I highly recommend them. They are excellent for student discussion and justifying reasoning. We have a tab to help you with your online testing requirements, and it includes much of the information that I shared with you, and contact information. So recognize that those tutorials are available here as well as in your account. So you may give this test 3 times a year. If you ever feel that you need a refresher on those tutorials, you can certainly do that either at the website or within your own testing account. I've also shared Carol's contact information and my contact information. Terry is also available. If you think this would be a presentation that would be something that you would want to share with your department live, as school outreach facilitators, we can do a Zoom meeting with your department if you think that would be helpful to help them set up their testing or interpret their scores. So just let us know either through through the MDTP website or contact us personally. All right, at this time, if you have questions that have not been answered yet, could you please go ahead and put it in the Q&A tab, and our moderators then will bring questions forward to the group.
Well, Pat, once again, you just did such a great job. Everybody is just, we don't have any questions. Okay.
I'm amazed, but great. I'm hoping you all feel confident and ready to go, because that was a lot of information on a hot afternoon. So I'm glad that that made sense.
Pat, can you go back one slide so that he can see the emails? Also,
Yes.
As she showed, these are Carol and Pat work out of San Diego and UC Davis. We do have outreach facilitators at each one of our sites that support the entire state. So you might want to go also into your regional sites to see who's
you can find that here, right?
And the MDTP on our website, so that you can see who where you're supported. So it says Tulare is supported by Agnes at CSU Fresno. So Agnes Tuska is our site director, and she's faculty professor of mathematics at CSU. Our CSUs are all, the site directors are faculty members, professors of mathematics, and our UCs, with the exception of Emiliano Gomez from UC Berkeley, are all outreach facilitators. 3 of them are here, and then Emiliano couldn't join us today. He's probably teaching at Berkeley. So let's see what other question. There was another one. We don't have any, actually don't have any more questions. You guys, we answered everything. Pat.
All right, you've made my teacher heart happy.
Either that, or like you say, we're just all wilting and just want to
yes.
something cold to eat and drink.
But just know that you can contact any of us with questions. We're more than happy to help, and I hope you get a lot of good information with your new students this year, and help to support them and move them forward as much as you possibly can.
We've also, this is our 3rd round of session 1 and 2. So we will be posting one of the recordings on our website later this week, by Thursday or Friday. That's kind of in Karen's realm. So it kind of depends on how we can get those converted to a movie. So generally then they would be, you could hear the audio and us talking with the question and answers. You probably won't pick this one. You don't have any questions.
I know. Well, Karen, if you could share the feedback link, perhaps.
She already did.
She already did, okay.
Which is great.
All right.